I want to tell you something about press conferences that most people miss. Not the words. Anyone can catch the words. I mean the architecture underneath them. The way a coach's answer breathes when he actually believes what he's saying versus the way it tightens when he's managing something he's already resolved but hasn't yet made official. I've been doing this long enough that I can't unhear it anymore. And when Todd Monken stood at that podium yesterday and carefully, methodically told everyone that the competition remains open, that every quarterback is being evaluated on equal footing, that no decisions have been finalized, I heard every word he said. I also heard everything he didn't say. And what wasn't said yesterday in Cleveland was louder than anything that made the highlight clips. So let me just tell you directly, because the media around this situation has been dancing around the obvious for weeks now, and I think that's doing a disservice to people who actually want to understand what's happening inside that building. Shedeur Sanders has won this quarterback competition, not on paper. There's no press release coming today. The organizational language out of Cleveland will stay strategically neutral until the moment they decide to make it formal. But the decision itself, that's already been made. It's been living inside that facility for weeks, shaping how coaching energy gets allocated, shaping what conversations are happening behind closed doors, shaping the texture of how every person in that building is orienting toward the future. Dylan Gabriel's time in Cleveland is effectively over. Deshaun Watson's body has answered the questions his career history alone could never quite settle. And when you clear all of that away, honestly, what's left has been obvious for anyone willing to look at the evidence without flinching from what it actually says. Let me start with Gabriel, because the most revealing moment from that entire press conference had almost nothing to do with what Monken said about him directly. It had everything to do with how he said it. There's a specific quality to a coach's language when he genuinely believes a player is still in a real competition for something meaningful. I'm not talking about what the words claim. I'm talking about the texture underneath them. When a coach is authentically invested in a player's shot at winning something, he gets specific without trying to. He references a throw from 2 days ago without prompting. He describes a decision made under pressure in a team period last Thursday. He mentions something that happened in the film room that changed his read on what that player is capable of. That specificity isn't manufactured for the press conference. It's just what genuine competitive belief sounds like when it's operating without a filter, because he's not calculating how the answer lands publicly. He's just telling you what he actually sees every day. That quality was gone when Gabriel came up yesterday. What replaced it was the kind of carefully managed, professionally neutral language that coaches develop specifically for situations they've already resolved internally but can't yet resolve publicly. He was not discussed the way coaches discuss quarterbacks they're genuinely still weighing. He was discussed the way coaches discuss players they're already moving past quietly before the formal announcement catches up to where reality already is. In this league, when that texture disappears from a head coach's language around a quarterback, it doesn't matter what the depth chart officially shows. The organizational decision has already landed. And I'll go further than that. My read on Gabriel's situation is that trade conversations aren't approaching. They're already happening, quietly, in the background, while the public statements stay calibrated and careful. But beyond whatever roster transaction eventually comes, what Gabriel's departure actually does for that quarterback room is worth slowing down on for a moment, because most coverage of this situation is missing it entirely. His presence in that building has been generating friction all offseason. Not the visible, reported kind that surfaces in beat coverage. The kind that every coaching staff member has had to manage continuously without it ever becoming a story. When a player genuinely believes, whether that belief is fully accurate or not, that the competition he entered was shaped before it started, that belief changes the atmosphere of a shared professional space in ways that are real and cumulative and genuinely costly. Coaching attention that belongs entirely to building an offensive identity gets divided. Energy that should be going toward football gets spent managing interpersonal dynamics that the competitive situation has made unavoidable. When that clears, the room reorganizes around something cleaner and sharper. That shift from a divided environment managing competing narratives to a unified environment building something together carries more competitive value than most analytical conversations about roster construction ever want to acknowledge. Now, the Watson dimension of what happened yesterday is where I think real conversation is going to develop once people actually slow down and process what Monken was communicating. He was careful about Watson in a way that felt calculated rather than natural. And I want to be fair here. The respect for Watson's football intelligence was genuine. The acknowledgement of everything he's accumulated operating inside NFL offenses at an elite level, the situational knowledge that only comes from making high-stakes decisions with real consequences attached over many years, none of that felt performative. Monken meant it, but running directly underneath those acknowledgements, detectable if you were actually listening for it, was the absence of something critical. There was no confidence, not even the indirect, carefully hedged version coaches produce when they actually feel it, that Watson can carry the full operational weight of an NFL season as a primary starter. That specific assurance never showed up. It wasn't said directly, because Monken is far too experienced to make that exposed a statement about a player still on his active roster, but its absence was present in a way I genuinely couldn't stop noticing across the entire exchange. Here's the honest organizational math around Watson, and the people inside that building have already completed it. The injury history isn't a storyline the media constructed. It's a documented medical reality that any serious evaluation has to account for without softening it. Building a sophisticated offensive system around a quarterback, building the chemistry between passer and receivers, between quarterback and offensive line, between signal caller and the coordinator's conceptual framework for attacking different defensive structures. That process takes months of accumulated real repetitions. It can't be paused around injury interruptions and simply resumed at the point where it stopped. Every pause costs something that takes time to rebuild, and the rebuild is never quite identical to what existed before the interruption. When you run the full honest projection, the one that accounts for genuine physical uncertainty rather than the optimistic version, the math doesn't produce a rational case for constructing your offensive identity around Watson as the primary starter when a real alternative is available and developing. Monken completed that projection. The front office completed it. Yesterday was the first moment that conclusion became detectable in the public language, for anyone listening carefully enough to notice it. What Watson can genuinely contribute in the right capacity, though, deserves honest acknowledgement before this conversation moves completely past him. Everything he carries from operating at the highest level of this game, the defensive structures he's read under genuine competitive pressure, the situational intelligence that only develops through surviving the hardest moments with real stakes attached, the psychological understanding of how to manage an offense when the game plan has collapsed and improvisation is the only option remaining. All of that becomes a living resource available to Shedeur every single week in the right structure. In the film room before game day, in sideline conversations between series, when a developing quarterback needs the perspective of someone who has already survived the version of what he's currently experiencing. Watson in that role, authentically committed to making that knowledge available rather than quietly managing resentment about where his career has arrived, is one of the more genuinely valuable backup situations in the league right now. The signals coming out of Cleveland suggest that internal conversation has already happened and came back with the right answer. So, clear the room, move Gabriel toward the exit and eliminate that friction. Reposition Watson as veteran intelligence rather than primary starter and redirect what he knows toward someone who can actually build on it. And what remains when all of that clearing is complete is exactly what the evidence has been pointing toward for months. Shedeur Sanders at the top of the depth chart with genuine organizational commitment finally operating behind him rather than quietly hedging against him. And I want to be precise about something that gets compressed in most versions of this story because it actually matters to understanding what's been built here. He is not there by elimination. He didn't win this because the alternatives failed spectacularly enough to create a vacancy he could occupy by default. He won it because he constructed an undeniable accumulating case through the quality of his preparation and the consistency of his competitive behavior across months of genuine organizational pressure. Pressure that was not always designed to support his success. How Shedeur won this is as important as the fact that he won it, and I mean that. He didn't do it through a single spectacular performance that shifted the narrative in a moment everyone could point to afterward. He didn't manufacture attention-generating episodes that build short-term momentum while creating long-term complications. He won the way quarterbacks who build real professional careers always win jobs that weren't handed to them. By showing up when showing up was genuinely harder than it looked from the outside. By handling situations that would have fractured the composure of less grounded players with a maturity that communicated something to that coaching staff that no individual throw in any individual drill could fully communicate on its own. The accumulated message he sent, through the daily consistency of his behavior across an entire offseason of real organizational pressure, was that when the season reaches its hardest point, and NFL seasons always reach that point eventually, he is not going to be the problem the coaching staff has to solve. He is going to be the thing they reach for when the problem needs solving. That message, delivered continuously and without drama, moves an experienced head coach toward genuine commitment more reliably than any physical attribute or highlight package ever could. Shedeur sent it through every available channel. Monken received it. Yesterday was the first public confirmation that it landed exactly where it needed to. Now, I want to spend real time on what's actually being constructed around Shedeur, because the developmental infrastructure taking shape in Cleveland is one of the more deliberately and thoughtfully assembled environments I've seen built around a young quarterback in recent memory. Taking Spencer Fano with a top 10 selection was not a subtle organizational message. It was a declaration made in the most valuable currency a franchise possesses, and it communicated something precise about institutional priorities. You don't spend a pick that valuable on an offensive tackle unless the quarterback you're building around is worth that level of commitment. And Fano is not a developmental project who needs time before he contributes meaningfully. He arrives as a ready-now elite pass protector who gave up essentially nothing against top competition across hundreds of evaluated college reps. The balance under pressure, the processing speed to read complex pass rush games and adjust his response in real time, rather than committing to an assignment and hoping it holds when the rush shifts. What he gives Shedeur is the thing developing quarterbacks most desperately need and most rarely actually receive in the early stages of their professional careers. Real pocket time, not compressed, panicked time that forces premature decisions before a full progression can develop. Genuine time that allows a young passer to work through his second and third reads, to make accumulating confident decisions that build the cognitive foundation every quarterback at this level requires, rather than the panicked, compressed decisions that build compensatory habits requiring years to unlearn once they're fully ingrained into how a quarterback operates under pressure. Casey Conception in the receiving corps adds a specific dimension that matters enormously to this developmental picture, and I don't think it's getting the attention it deserves. A route runner who generates genuine separation against tight man coverage is precisely what a developing quarterback needs most, because contested man coverage is the defensive structure that most consistently damages young passers before they're ready for it. Winning against man coverage requires a quarterback to commit to the throw before separation is fully visible at the top of the route, to trust that the receiver will win the release and execute the break with the precision the concept demands. That trust is built through repetition, through the accumulated experience of throwing to a receiver who consistently delivers what the route requires over and over until the commitment happens before the conscious calculation does. Pair a quarterback who processes defensive intentions quickly and decisively with a receiver who wins reliably in contested situations, and the combination forces defensive coordinators to account for it in ways that stress every other coverage decision they're making. Denzel Boston on the outside creates a completely different coverage problem with a completely different physical profile, and the compounding effect of receivers who demand fundamentally different defensive responses forces coordinators into compromises they cannot fully resolve. That is the difference between a functional receiving corps and a genuine strategic weapon that makes an entire offense harder to defend. Underneath all of that offensive construction sits a defensive foundation that finished top 5 in the league last season and has no structural reason for significant decline, and that matters more to Shedeur's development than most people are talking about. That defense keeps Cleveland competitive, while the offense develops its identity and rhythm, which is the single most valuable thing a defensive unit can provide for a young quarterback in his first full season as the unquestioned starter. It removes the catastrophic early pressure of needing to be fully formed immediately, which is precisely the pressure that breaks talented young quarterbacks before their development can reach what their actual ceiling supports. A quarterback who genuinely trusts that his defense can keep the game manageable will take the calculated risks that accelerate development. A quarterback who feels that any mistake might cost the game will make the conservative decisions that protect the short-term scoreboard while quietly stunting long-term growth in ways that compound over seasons before anyone clearly identifies what happened to the trajectory. Cleveland is deliberately engineering an environment where Shedeur can take the intelligent risks that make quarterbacks genuinely better over time, rather than just safer in the immediate moment. Here's where everything lands, said as plainly as I know how to say it. 3 quarterbacks entered this process. One is being transitioned out of the building because the head coach's language has already communicated, for anyone paying honest attention, that he doesn't belong in the future being constructed there. One is being repositioned because the honest projection of his physical situation makes him a genuine asset in a supporting capacity and a real liability as a primary starter across a full season with playoff ambitions attached. And one has been quietly, relentlessly, and with remarkable composure, building his case every single day, while the organizational environment around him shifted and eventually cleared a direct path to where the evidence was always pointing. Monken told the world yesterday that no decision has been made. What he actually communicated, in the texture of every answer, every careful pause, every piece of language deliberately chosen or deliberately avoided, is that the decision has been living inside that building for weeks already. The formal announcement is a procedural formality. What it will announce has already quietly, irreversibly begun.